inquiry into undercover policing will examine files held by the Special Branch on Members of Parliament.
Minister Mike Penning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Undercover policing is an essential tactic in fighting crime. However, we have known for some time that there are serious historic failings in undercover policing and their practices. To improve the public's confidence in undercover work, we must ensure that no repeat of these failings occur again. That is why the Home Secretary established a public inquiry earlier this month to investigate thoroughly undercover policing and the operation of the Special Demonstration Squad, and confirm that the appointment of Lord Justice Pitchford, a highly experienced criminal judge of the Court of Appeal, as its chairman. The scope of the inquiry, which was announced to Parliament on the 12th of March, will focus on deployment of police officers on covert human intelligence sources, CHIS, by the SDS and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit and other police forces in England and Wales. The inquiry will review practices and the use of undercover policing to establish justice for the families and the victims, and making recommendations for the future to learn from those mistakes. All interested parties will be consulted by Lord Pitchford's team and himself, and all interested parties to the inquiry over the next coming months. They will review and publish their terms of reference for the inquiry by the end of July, and I think this is an important piece of work that we should encourage Lord Pitchford to get on with.
Peter Hayes.
I thank the Minister for his reply. Would the Home Secretary, and would he pass on to the Home Secretary my request that she ensures that the remit of the public inquiry she's announced into the operations of the Special Demonstration Squad includes surveillance of MPs publicly named by Peter Francis when he was an undercover officer between 1990 and 2001. Is he aware that aside from myself, he saw a Special Branch file on my Right Honourable friend, the member for Blackburn, who was actually Home Secretary for 4 of these years, and files on my Right Honourable friends, the members for Camberwell and Peckham and Lewisham Deptford, and my Honourable friends, the members for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, Islington North and Bolsover, as well as former colleagues Tony Benn, Ken Livingstone and Bernie Grant. Did this monitoring affect our ability as MPs to speak confidentially with constituents? What, if any, impact did that have on our ability to represent them properly? We know, for example, that the campaign to get justice for Stephen Lawrence, the black teenager murdered by racists, was infiltrated by the SDS, and that the police blocked a proper prosecution. Did police infiltrators in the Lawrence campaign exploit private information shared by constituents or lawyers with any of us as MPs? Will the Home Office order the police to disclose all relevant information, and to each of the MPs affected our complete individual personal registry files? It is hardly revelatory that the Special Branch had a file on people like me dating back 40 years ago to anti-apartheid or anti-Nazi League activist days, because we were seen through a Cold War prism as subversive. Even though we vigorously opposed Stalinism, that didn't stop us being lumped together with Moscow sympathizers. But surely the fact that these files were still active for at least 10 years whilst we were MPs raises fundamental questions about parliamentary sovereignty and privilege, principles which are vital to our democracy. It is one thing to have a police file on an MP suspected of crime, child abuse, or even cooperating with terrorism, but quite another to maintain one deriving from campaigns promoting values of social justice, human rights and equal opportunities which are shared by millions of British people. Surely, Mr. Speaker, that means travelling down a road that endangers the liberty of us all.
Minister of State Mike Penning.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I think he's put his point very well to the House today. I think it's important that the country has confidence in the way that the police operate, which is exactly why the Home Secretary instigated the inquiry. Lord Justice Pitchford will, I'm sure, be contacting, and his officials contacting the Right Honourable Gentleman and others in this House, and that I've left this House, to make sure that their views are known as he comes forward with the way that he's going to take his inquiry forward.
Mr. David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last year, there have been a number of revelations about the police improperly hacking into journalists' telephone calls, improperly breaching legal privilege and using the information they obtained from breaching legal privilege of suspects, and the government has been very coy about responding to my requests about the current state of the Wilson Doctrine. If these allegations that have come out now are true, it indicates the Wilson Doctrine was broken in spirit, if not in the letter. Can he make sure that the inquiry actually comes right up to date in terms of what it looks into, and that it's drawn broadly enough to ensure that none of these risks exist today?
Minister of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to my right honourable friend that I've never been coy. I don't think it's one of my attributes I don't really have. But on the point of the Wilson Doctrine, it's plainly obvious why we have to be careful. There is litigation in place, and we need to make sure that that goes further. All I can say going forward is that by the end of July, the Lord Justice Pitford will have set out the remit and the sorts of things that my right honourable friend has just alluded to in his comments, and I'm sure he will put those directly to him to make sure that that's part of his inquiry.
Mr. Jack Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, the allegations in the newspapers today will send a chill up the spine of all those who value free speech, democracy and campaigning for one's beliefs. Investigated not for crime, but for political beliefs. This is quite obviously unacceptable. Almost 5 years ago, before the last general election, the activities of what was then the Special Demonstration Squad were reported in the Guardian newspaper. Over the last few years, we have seen horrifying allegations, many looked at as part of Chief Constable Mick Creedon's Operation Hearn investigations. Allegations that SDS officers engaged in sexual relationships, even fathered children, then leaving women as if the relationship had never occurred. Using the identity of dead children for covert identities. And allegations that the Lawrence family was spied upon, the grieving parents of a cruelly murdered son. 2 years ago, the Shadow Home Secretary called for stronger safeguards in undercover operations. There remains an overwhelming case further strengthened today for more safeguards, including for independent pre-authorization, for example, by the Office of Surveillance Commissioner, especially for the small number of long-term covert operations, and then continuous independent checks, not paper-based. I hope the Minister can respond directly on that point. But today we also want assurances that the inquiry into the activities of the SDS, led by Lord Justice Pickford, will be extended to the allegations set out in the newspapers today. And as the Right Honourable Member for Neath has said, this is an affront to parliamentary democracy, to the sovereignty and independence of this House. It is also an affront to that vital principle, the breach of which can be very serious indeed, and that's the confidentiality between a Member of Parliament and who he or she represents. Lord Justice Pickford's inquiry must be extended to look into these as part of the investigation into the activities of the Special Demonstrations Unit of the Met. I stress once again, Mr. Speaker, undercover policing remains a crucial tool in combating serious and organised crime, but it must not be abused. And if I can say this in conclusion, we have on this side of the House pressed for years for much stronger oversight of undercover policing. All the more important in light of today's shocking revelations. There needs to be an extensive and wide inquiry conducted at the next stages by Lord Justice Pickford, but crucially, it should have the flexibility to investigate any allegations as to the activity of undercover policing, and in particular, those allegations relating to surveillance of this members of this House.
Minister of State.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments and his questions, and I think the whole House would understand exactly the concerns that we all have as parliamentarians. But it is for Lord Pitchford to decide as to where he wants to take this forward. And that's exactly why the concerns that was touched on at the... I think the honourable gentleman is better than that. This is a really, really serious inquiry, and there have been concerns going on for many years, when his own government was in place. But it is this government that's brought the inquiry forward because I'm a Inspector of Constabulary, and we'll wait and we'll work together. And if the Lord Pitchford asks for more, I'm sure we'll give him more.
I'd like to ask the Minister, it's more important than just feeding in our views to an inquiry. The question is what he decides, and I would like him to assure me that the government will let me see a full copy of my file. In the 70s and the 1980s, when I was at Brent Law Centre and then at Liberty, I was campaigning for the rights of women, for the rights of workers, and the right to demonstrate. None of that was against the law. None of that was undermining our democracy. On the contrary, it was actually essential for our democracy. The security services do an important job, and the government, of course, should support them. But if they overstep the mark, the government must hold them to account. Exactly. So can I repeat a request I made to the previous government that was turned down, and make it again to this government in the light of these new revelations? Will he give me an assurance that this government will release to me a full copy of my file?
Mr. Speaker, I would love to give the right honourable lady that assurance. I can't at the dispatch box. There's no point trying to shout down the Minister, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, there may be reasons, and I was a counter-terrorism minister in Northern Ireland where redactions had to take place and redactions have. I will make sure that as much that can be released is released, and I give that assurance to the honourable lady, and I will write to honourable gentleman.
Dennis Skinner.
Well, all I'd like to say and inquire from the Minister is he must have been a busy man to follow me at 5,000 industrial meetings in the last 30-odd years. I mean, I went to Grunwick, I did 3 pit strikes, I went to Wapping, I was all over the place. I always thought when I saw that man with that posh flat cap on that looked as if he'd bought it from Harrods, I thought he might be the agent provocateur present at the meeting. The thing that's always worried me, and the Minister might be able to answer this, as well as whoever's looking into this matter, is why is it they only seem to pursue left-wingers, socialists? Is this one of the reasons why all those paedophiles managed to disappear into thin air? And is it the reason why Jimmy Savile never had his collar felt?
Minister.
I'm tempted to probably treat I think it was a questionnaire with the consent reserves, but having been a member of the FBU and been on picket lines over the years, perhaps they may even been looking at me in the funny hat that the honourable gentleman refers to.
Dame Joan Ruddock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1981, I was elected the chair of the campaign for nuclear disarmament, and 2 years later, an MI5 agent, Cathy Massiter, blew the whistle on the surveillance, the phone taps, and the collection of special branch reports that had been undertaken on me. She cited political interference in the service. She said what had happened was illegal, and she resigned. Now, in 87, I became a member of this House. I took the loyal oath. In 1997, I became a minister. I subsequently signed the Official Secrets Act. How is it that surveillance was carried out on me all of that time? I want to know and get the Minister to understand who authorised that surveillance? On what grounds was the surveillance authorised? And he needs to answer those questions, because this is a political issue. It is his responsibility, the Home Office's and Home Secretary's responsibility. Mr. Speaker, I am leaving this House. I can do no more than make these points, put in an FOI to the Commissioner, write to the Home Secretary. But frankly, it is something that affects all MPs. And even though I leave, he needs to do something, and the future government of this House needs to ensure that there is a proper investigation. This should never, ever have happened to members of this House.
Mr. Speaker, can I say, the Honourable, that's exactly why the inquiry is being put in place, and whether or not, from a sedentary position, the Honourable Lady, right Honourable, says I'm pathetic. At least this government is doing something. Actually, not unlike the previous government. I'm trying to take a tone at this. I'm trying to take a sensible tone at this. I have every sympathy with members of this House and have left this House. Well, that's why this inquiry is being done.
Extremely grateful to the Minister for attending to these questions. He's discharging his responsibilities. I think there is a feeling in the House that it's a tad unfortunate that the Secretary of State for the Home Department is not able to be at the box. But the Minister's doing his duty as he thinks fit, and we acknowledge that. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that this story has finally come out. And as members of Parliament, we're in a position to raise questions with the Home Office and demand the truth come out. Unfortunately, many others, unknown to us who were under surveillance, do not have that opportunity. The question is one of accountability of the Metropolitan Police. Who authorised this tapping? Who knew about it? Did the Home Secretary or successive Home Secretaries know about it? If they did, why didn't they accept the Wilson Doctrine in respect of MPs? Why did they allow this covert operation to go on within the Metropolitan Police? And I'm very surprised that in his answer a few moments ago, he said the files might be released to us, but they may have to be redacted for security reasons. If I'm under surveillance, or the late Bernie Grant, or any of my friends are under surveillance, and whatever meetings we were at, they were presumably there, whatever phone calls we made, they were presumably recording, I think we have a right to know about that. We represent constituents. We're in a position of trust with our constituents. That trust is betrayed by this invasion of our privacy by the Metropolitan Police. And I ask the Minister again, can we each of us have a full, unredacted version of everything that was written about us, every piece of surveillance that was undertaken of us, our families and our friends?
Mr. Speaker, on the point that the honourable gentleman raised, which is a very valid point, which is why the inquiry is placed, is that yes, members of Parliament can stand in this House and ask a question like we did today. Many of the victims can't. That's why the inquiry is in place. I will do everything I possibly can to make sure that as much information is passed to members of Parliament now or in the past, but I can't give a guarantee. And no minister of any colour, of any persuasion, and there were previous Home Secretaries from his side of the House that these questions need to be made to, and I will do everything I possibly can to make sure these answers come forward.
Mr. Jack Straw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the observations by my honourable friend Islington North, does the Minister accept that if these allegations are correct, then we have an extraordinary situation where I, as Home Secretary, and for 3 years, from 1997 to 2000, was the police authority for the Metropolitan Police, not only knew nothing, whatever, about what appears to have been going on within the Metropolitan Police, but may also have been subject to unlawful surveillance myself as Home Secretary.
Disgraceful.
That ought to be looked at. But the trigger, what appears to be the trigger, which is much more serious, ought to be looked at, which was my decision, taken against a lot of reluctance by the Metropolitan Police, to establish a full judicial inquiry into the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And what is completely unacceptable was that it appears that elements of the Metropolitan Police were themselves spying on the bereaved family of Stephen Lawrence.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for the tone of his comments, because he knows from his own experience how difficult it is, and for him to realise that he was not only in the dark about authorisations that had taken place, that's exactly what this inquiry has to do. And the Lord Justice has to have full access, and I'm sure the Right Honourable Gentleman will give him all the help, even though he sadly will be leaving the House, but all the help that he can in the future, to find out why a Home Secretary and Home Secretaries and ministers, police ministers were not informed as what was going inside the Met Police, and that's what this inquiry must do.
Mr. John MacDonald.
A few months ago, I met with the Herne Inquiry officers who confirmed to me that they were and covertly surveilling the campaign set up by myself and Mrs. Reel, purely and simply to find out what happened to her son Ricky when he died 13 years ago. They attended it, and we were told we were then collateral intrusion. Also, 2 weeks ago, I tabled an early day motion 899 because I was contacted by Peter Francis, the former member of the Metropolitan Police Force's Special Demonstration Squad, who confirmed in a statement that I read for him that actually covert surveillance went on at trade unions, the FBU, the CWU, the National Union of Teachers and UCAT, together with all the families that we now know of these individual justice groups, because that's all they were doing, trying to seek justice. And in the real case was simply to find out what happened to their unfortunately lost son. Could the Minister confirm, and this rests with the Minister, not with the inquiry, that immunity will be given to Peter Francis and other whistleblowers who come forward, immunity against any action under the Official Secrets Act when they're giving evidence to this inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, I and the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister will want everybody that gives evidence as whistleblowers to have immunity. We need to get to the truth. That is something I'm committed from this dispatch box to do, and I'm sure I have the authority of the others to say so.
Mr. Tom Watson. Can I ask the Minister why he can give immunity to whistleblowers in this case, but not give a cast iron guarantee that he can give immunity to whistleblowers in the child abuse investigation?
To be fair, Mr. Speaker, I answered a specific question on a specific point, and I will look into exactly what the point of that is. It doesn't come under my portfolio, but I will look into it and find out. And he's raised a very valid point. I will write to him.
Mr. Mike Gapes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many people of my generation, I spent far too many weekends in the 60s and 70s on marches and demonstrations against racism, the Vietnam War, and many other issues. Many of those have now become members of this House. How do we know that whether or not our names are any of these files? 12 years ago, I was contacted by the Sunday Times, who told me that a Stasi file had turned up in Berlin with my name on a document that was there. And did I know anything about it? I'd like to know whether the British Stasi's equivalent had also documents in my name on it.
Mr. Speaker, no matter how many wrongdoings has been done, we don't have Stasi police in this country, and thank goodness that we don't. I have no idea why the Stasi were so interested in the gentleman, but and some of us were doing other things in the 60s and 70s. As I said before, I would do everything we possibly can to make sure that as much information is passed to colleagues of this House and those that have left this House.
Mr. Paul Flynn. As someone like most of us here with a lifelong trust in the integrity of the police and security services, I had the very disturbing experience a few weeks ago, along with the chair of the Home Affairs Committee, of reading the report on Operation Tiberius. We weren't allowed to have our cameras with us, our phones. The information in that document is deeply shocking. It's a story of decades of conspiracies between the police and criminal gangs. Knowing that the case of Daniel Morgan from Llanfrecffa, murdered while he was investigating police corruption 28 years ago, still under corruption, the failure of the security services to identify the way that Sir Cyril Smith and Sir Jimmy Savile were destroying lives, isn't there a case for publishing the report on Operation Tiberius so the whole country could know the depth of corruption that's taken place in the Metropolitan Police?
Mr. Speaker, I think at this stage, and I know the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee isn't here, but to pay tribute to the work that the committee has done, not only on this inquiry, particularly inquiry of Tiberius, but other inquiries, particularly within this Parliament. I personally do not know why the file wasn't released and why, for instance, when it was viewed, but I will find out and I'll write to the Honourable Gentleman.
Acts when I became a Member of Parliament in '97 was to call for the Stephen Lawrence inquiry to be set up. That led to a threat being made against me, which in turn led to a special branch coming to my house to install security. Now, having taken that on face value, now I'm beginning to question just exactly what the purpose of Special Branch's visit to my house was. We are finding out about various members of Parliament through the media who have been included in this. Can the Minister give us an undertaking that every Member of Parliament, if they have been under any sort of covert surveillance, will be notified of that fact?
Mr. Speaker, I think that's exactly the indication that I've given. If I didn't make it fully, then I think that's very important. I also have had Special Branch come to my house, and because of my roles in Northern Ireland, I had that sort of surveillance put